David's lake cabin wasn't just a property, it was his dream, the kind of place people spent years imagining but rarely achieved. Nestled among towering pines, the cabin overlooked a quiet lake that shimmered like glass in the early morning light. Birds darted across the water, their wings leaving small ripples, while the gentle breeze carried the earthy scent of pine needles and fresh grass. Every corner of this place reminded David why he bought it. To escape the constant honking of city traffic, the endless office calls, and the artificial rush of urban life. For David, weekends at the cabin were sacred. He would wake up early, make himself a strong cup of coffee, and sit out on the dock with his dog by his side, listening to the world slowly wake up. Sometimes he fished, sometimes he read, but most often he simply sat in silence, letting nature clear away the clutter of his mind. The cabin was his sanctuary, a place where nothing could disturb him. At least, that's what he thought. What David didn't anticipate was that even in a place meant for peace, trouble could knock on the door. And in this case, trouble's name was Karen. Karen wasn't just a neighbor. She was the self-proclaimed queen of the community, the president of the local HOA. Though many joked, she acted more like a sheriff in a town no one asked her to run. From the moment David moved in, she had her eyes on him. At first, it was small things. A passive-aggressive note about the improper color of his mailbox, a complaint that his dock extended too far into the lake, even a warning about leaving his canoe tied to the shore overnight. None of it was official. David's cabin wasn't even under the HOA's jurisdiction. But Karen lived off control. Rules were her oxygen, and anyone who didn't bow to them became her enemy. Over time, her obsession grew. David started finding envelopes stuffed into his mailbox, each one filled with accusations and warnings written in bold capital letters. Sometimes she'd show up uninvited, hands on hips, pointing out imaginary violations with the determination of someone uncovering crimes. Most neighbors kept their distance from her, preferring to avoid confrontation. But David, calm and steady, never let her intimidate him. He often thought of her like a storm that passed quickly, loud, chaotic, and temporary. What he didn't know was that this storm was about to collide with the most important meeting of his life. This weekend was no ordinary retreat. David's guest was someone who could change everything, not just for him, but for countless homeowners who had been bullied by overzealous HOAs. The state attorney general himself had reached out, wanting to hear firsthand accounts of HOA abuse. David's story had been brought to his attention by mutual connections, and now, in the quiet of the lake cabin, the attorney general wanted to hear it directly. David prepared with care. He cleaned every corner of the cabin, polished the wooden table, and organized the thick folder of documents he had saved over the years. Letters, threats, photos, and even recordings of Karen's confrontations. His nerves buzzed with anticipation, but beneath the nerves was pride. He wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was standing up for every family who had been pushed around by people like Karen. When the Attorney General arrived in a sleek, black car, the cabin's tranquility shifted into something powerful. The two men shook hands, their conversation flowing easily as they sat down with steaming cups of coffee. The atmosphere was professional, serious, but also hopeful. For David, this meeting wasn't just about telling his story, it was about making sure what happened to him never happened to anyone else again. But while David was finally finding his voice, Karen was watching. From the wide bay window of her house across the gravel road, she spotted the unfamiliar car. She squinted, her mind racing. Who was this man in the sharp suit? Why was he meeting David? In her imagination, every possibility was worse than the last. Maybe David was selling his property without HOA approval. Maybe he was plotting to expand his dock illegally. Or perhaps, she thought darkly, he was hosting someone dangerous. Karen's world was built on control, and when she didn't know what was happening, she panicked. She paced her living room, muttering to herself, her heels clacking against the hardwood floor. The longer she thought, the angrier she became. She felt entitled to know everything in the neighborhood, and if David wasn't going to tell her, then she'd find out herself. Fueled by a mix of suspicion, arrogance, and entitlement, Karen grabbed her oversized handbag, stormed out of her front door, and marched toward David's cabin. David and the Attorney General were in the middle of discussing a particularly damning letter when the cabin door flew open. Karen barged in without knocking, her voice slicing through the calm like a blade. "David, what on earth do you think you're doing?" she shouted, her finger already wagging in the air. She didn't even glance at the man in the suit. Her focus was squarely on David, her words tumbling out like a storm she couldn't control. "You can't just hold secret meetings in this community. Everything must go through the HOA. You know the rules," she screeched, stomping further inside the cabin as if it were her own living room. She accused him of zoning violations, secret deals, and even inviting outsiders without approval. Her voice grew louder, her gestures more dramatic, as if she were performing on a stage. David sat quietly, trying not to smirk, while the Attorney General leaned back in his chair, observing the spectacle with sharp eyes. At last, the man in the suit had heard enough. He set his pen down, straightened his back, and cleared his throat. His voice was calm, but it carried the kind of authority that made the entire room pause. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "you have just entered private property without permission. And for your information, I am the State Attorney General." The effect was immediate. Karen froze mid-sentence, her face drained of color, then flushed red as the weight of her mistake hit. For years, she had spoken to neighbors like they were beneath her, never imagining she'd face someone who could hold her accountable. Her lips trembled as she tried to form a response, but no words came. For once, Karen was speechless. The very power she relied on had evaporated in an instant. The Attorney General rose to his feet, his presence filling the small cabin with authority. "This behavior," he continued, his eyes locking on Karen, "is exactly what my office is investigating. Harassment, intimidation, abuse of authority, under the guise of community rules. You've just demonstrated it perfectly." He turned to David. "Please, continue. Tell me everything." David opened his folder and calmly laid out the history. The letters shoved into his mailbox, the constant intrusions, the baseless accusations, and the threats that never ended. Each piece of evidence painted a picture of relentless bullying. With every word, Karen shrank smaller in her seat, realizing she had walked straight into her own downfall. The Attorney General took notes, nodding as David spoke, his face serious but supportive. Karen tried weakly to defend herself, stammering about community standards and protecting property values, but her voice cracked under pressure. Each excuse sounded smaller, weaker, less convincing. The Attorney General asked her pointed questions, legal ones she couldn't answer. Every attempt to regain control slipped through her fingers. By the time David finished his account, it was clear. Karen wasn't the enforcer anymore. She was the one under scrutiny. For David, it felt like a weight lifting off his shoulders. He had endured her harassment quietly for too long, but now the tables had turned. And the best part, he didn't even have to fight back. Karen had delivered. Her own downfall by barging into his cabin uninvited. When the meeting finally ended, the Attorney General shook David's hand firmly. "Your story will help a lot of people," he said. "Change starts with voices like yours." David felt relief wash over him, mixed with pride. His little cabin, once just a place for fishing and sunsets, had become the stage for something much bigger: accountability and justice. Karen shuffled back across the road, her head lowered, her once confident stride reduced to a defeated shuffle. The neighborhood no longer saw her as the queen of rules, but as someone who had overstepped so far that she embarrassed herself in front of the highest law officer in the state. As David sat back on his porch with his dog at his side, the lake glistened in the fading light. He realized the cabin wasn't just his sanctuary anymore. It was a symbol, a reminder that no matter how powerful someone thinks they are, truth and justice always have a way of shining through.